Tonight, round two, deadly storms again striking the south. A massive funnel cloud tearing through New Orleans. The terrifying scene unfolding on live TV. At least one person killed, more than 60 tornadoes touching down across 5 states in the last 48 hours. The stunning stories of survival emerging. One homeowner calling what they experienced worse than Katrina. The leader of a hard-hit community joins Top Story Live tonight, what his residents need most. And the storm now moving east. 30 million people under alert from Florida all the way to New England. Also breaking tonight, the U.S. accusing Russia of committing war crimes. New drone footage showing what's left of Mariupol. Hospitals, schools, and homes destroyed. Russia relentlessly attacking civilian targets by air as Putin's ground invasion remains stalled. Ukrainian forces regaining ground near Kyiv. All of this as President Biden lands in the region late today for a high-stakes summit with NATO allies. The announcement on U.S. troops he's expected to make. Heated hearing, the fiery moments between Ketanji Brown Jackson and Republican senators. The historic nominee, again accused of being soft on crime, how she responded. Neighborhood shootout, the shocking video, 2 cars colliding head-on as shots ring out from both vehicles. The suspects fleeing the scene. Beverly Hills heist, crooks shattering a storefront in broad daylight with a sledgehammer, stealing millions of dollars of jewelry. The clue, one suspect left behind that could help police track them down. And remembering a trailblazer, tributes pouring in for Madeleine Albright, who broke barriers as the first female U.S. Secretary of State. Andrea Mitchell takes a look back at her life and legacy. Top Story starts right now. And good evening. The damage widespread, and this time it was caught on live TV. We begin Top Story tonight with the deadly storm slamming the Deep South, a day after severe weather rocked parts of Texas and Louisiana, now taking a direct hit. A massive tornado touching down in New Orleans. You see the dark funnel cloud right there in full frame, at least an EF3. One person has been killed so far. The twister tore through the city. Massive damage reported in St. Bernard Parish. You see this, and parts of the lower 9th Ward. Residents now picking up the pieces in areas you'll remember devastated by Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, and again by Hurricane Ida just 7 months ago. The president of that parish joins Top Story Live tonight, what his community needs most. And daylight revealing the extent of the destruction, drone footage showing homes ripped off their foundations. Others, you see right here, completely flattened. The storm now moving up the East Coast. That forecast in just a moment. But we begin first with Sam Brock leading us off from the area hardest hit.
Splitting off.
The sight of a black funnel cloud barreling toward New Orleans.
There it goes.
Prompted gasps and cries.
There it is. You can see it. Get to your safe place.
A monstrous twister, leaving fractured neighborhoods in its wake.
This is it. This is 1934 road. This is what's left of it.
Oh, yeah, you can't go in there.
This is Taryn Baker's once beautiful home, which she spent years saving to buy.
It's unlivable. You have to basically start all over.
I see a tear streaming down your
yes.
face. How devastating has the last 20
I mean, it's very devastating when you know, like it's all your hard work is just going up in the air.
Now, Baker's friends help her gather what clothes and items they can and load them onto a truck. In one sense, New Orleans was fortunate.
Damn!
The terror streaking over the Mississippi River only causing 1 confirmed fatality and a handful of injuries. In what preliminary surveys show was at least an EF3. On the other, a region historically pummeled from Hurricanes Katrina, Zeta, and Ida just took another blow, even if on a more micro scale.
I've been through Katrina, but this was way worse because everything was level. The whole neighborhood was level.
An area trying to bury that trauma is a particularly resilient bunch, ready to bounce back again.
This is, I mean, your life, right?
Yeah, this is my life right here out of a bag. This is it.
And Tom, as for the search and rescue efforts, there were 2 cycles, I'm told, one last night, then again this morning, which means that the fatality now sits at 1 total. It's a 25-year-old man who, according to NOLA.com, had just driven his truck to his house, had walked into the house right before this all happened. St. Bernard officials tell me that another home was picked up and put on top of his, leading to his death. Just another chapter of this horrible tragedy. Tom, back to you.
And it speaks to the power of those tornadoes. All right, Sam Brock leading us off tonight on that breaking news. For more on the ongoing wide-scale cleanup efforts in New Orleans right now, I want to bring in Guy McInnes. He's the president of St. Bernard Parish, which got hit the hardest. Guy, thanks so much for joining us tonight. My first question is, as the sun sets there tonight, we were just watching Sam's report. What is the situation on the ground?
Well, Tom, first of all, thank you for checking in on St. Bernard Parish. The situation on the ground today, it's getting a little bit better today. We did our full assessment. We are turning that into FEMA to see what type of funding we're going to get. Residents are out in full force, along with their neighbors, cleaning up the neighborhoods. And we have Entergy, which is our power company, Atmos, our gas company. They are out there making sure that these areas are safe so that we can bring in our contractors, our volunteers who's going to help, who's going to bring clothing, who's going to bring housing, who's going to bring food to this area so that we can get our citizens back up and running. So the weather forecast is great for this week. And actually it's a blessing to have that during this time. And we're going to get after it here real soon. And all of the federal, state, and local efforts seems like they're going to come together with the funding, and we're going to make it happen for our citizens.
Guy, you got hit by Hurricane Ida last August. I was down there. I know the cleanup and the rebuilding effort is not easy. How much of a setback is this? And I asked you that because how do you convince your residents to come back after back-to-back disasters?
Well, you know, it's pretty easy. You know, this is where we're from. You know, I told somebody today, if you grew up here, you'd want to come back too. So that part's easy, and it's kind of sad that we're good at this, you know, this recovery stuff, right? So it's a resiliency. It's the type of people we have, and the comeback. The school system was in. Our children were in school today, except for one right there in Araby. Life goes on. We had that one citizen who perished during this storm. Our prayers go out to that family. We had 7 people going to the hospital with minor injuries. It's a miracle that we don't have more dead with this devastation that I'm looking at some of your footage. So, you know, we met with the governor today. We had conversations with Congressman Scalise, Congressman Richmond, and our legislature here, and Congressman Carter. We believe we have a road to recovery, and it's going to be a short recovery for the parish, and for some of these homeowners, it's going to be a long recovery, and we're going to do everything that we can within our power to help them get back on their feet.
All right, Guy McInnes, the parish president there in St. Bernard. That New Orleans resilience is real. We appreciate your time. We know your community will come back and rebuild. Again, our thoughts and prayers with you and your community tonight. Those severe storms not letting up. Watches up across the Midwest heading into tomorrow as the South recovers from over 60 reported tornadoes. NBC meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now. Michelle, what more can you tell us about the track? But I'm also curious, how strong were those tornadoes last night?
Yeah. Hi there, Tom. Well, we had a wild and scary last 48 hours, and we are watching storms right now. So let's talk about the numbers, and I'll talk specifically about the tornado yesterday. So we had 37 tornado reports on Monday. We had 27 yesterday, far exceeding what we expect in the month of March, even though we do start to see severe weather. Let's talk about last night's tornado, though. We look at the enhanced Fujita scale. It's a tedious process. The meteorologists go out, they go start to finish, they look at the width too, and they rate it on the strength of the tornado based on the damage it produces. So they look at the spots where we see the most damage. So preliminary reports are seeing an EF3. That means we can go either from EF0 to EF5. Right now we're looking at a EF3. Tomorrow the report comes out. And because we're looking at severe damage in terms of the roofs being torn off, walls being blown away, and trees being uprooted, you certainly saw that in Sam's piece, and you heard him say that we do think this is an EF3 tornado. But look at the wide range of winds from 136 miles per hour to 165. Now, Tom, on record, 2017, that was the strongest tornado ever to hit that area at 150 miles. So tomorrow we're going to find out if that tops that. It's certainly going to be very close, but we'll let you know that tomorrow. This is what is happening right now. We continue to watch the severe weather stretching all the way to the southeast to the Ohio Valley. We've seen tornado warnings in and out all night long. We're going to continue to see this, but zooming in a little closer to the Ohio Valley, because we have a tornado watch box until 10 o'clock. We have a severe thunderstorm watch box until 9 o'clock. And again, we're seeing these storms come in and out with those warnings. This is a severe threat for tonight, 23 million at risk. And Tom will end it here because tomorrow that threat continues all up and down the East Coast with the threat for hail. Also some really strong winds, and we can't rule out the chance of some tornadoes. Tom?
All right, thank you for that. We see those radars popping. We will stay on top of those storms. We want to turn now to the war in Ukraine, the U.S. formally accusing Russia of war crimes tonight. This as Ukrainian forces claim they've recaptured some of the territory Russia invaded. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel in Ukraine again for us tonight.
Drone footage released by local Ukrainian fighters shows the aftermath of what looks like carpet bombing inside Mariupol. Similar attacks on homes, hospitals, and schools led the U.S. State Department today to assess Russian forces have committed war crimes. This morning, Russia fired more missiles at Kyiv, destroying apartments and trying to spread fear. But the people of this city refuse to bow down. Russia has significantly intensified its attacks in and around Kyiv over the last 24 hours, leaving more and more homes across the city like this one. Barbara, a resident and volunteer, said Russia has already bombed this area 4 times. But it's not helping Russia's advance. In a government building in Kyiv, 2 of the capital's top security officials monitor a real-time battle map, unclassified, that shows Russian troops are losing territory around Kyiv. The red areas are under Russian occupation. The blue areas are new territory. Ukrainian forces say they've recaptured in the last 48 hours, much of it in the last 24 hours. It's not just that the Russians don't have gas or other means to fight, but it's the actions of the Ukrainian army that led to destroying their lines of communication, so they can't replenish their food, fuel, and other equipment, said Serhiy Knyazyev, the city's police and military advisor.
Have you ever seen something like this before during the course of this war? Is this the most blue areas that you've had?
We haven't seen such big territorial gains in the outskirts of Kyiv, he said.
Tom, few expected that 1 month into this war, the Ukrainian government would still be standing. But increasingly, Russia's war looks like a fiasco. And according to a new NATO estimate, as many as 15,000 Russian troops have been killed so far. Tom?
Richard Engel again for us from Kyiv tonight. Richard, thank you. As the war in Ukraine passes the 1-month mark, President Biden set to meet with NATO allies in Brussels for a high-stakes summit. NBC News chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker joins us now from Brussels. Kristen, the president arrives in Europe with a bold move, accusing Russia of war crimes. Some may say this move is taken too long, but it's no doubt a power play on the part of the Americans. How does this set the stage for the president in the days ahead?
Well, Tom, you're absolutely right. This is a power play on the part of the Americans. The goal is to try to turn up the pressure on Vladimir Putin to back down. Now, of course, several days ago, President Biden himself accused Vladimir Putin of war crimes. But this formalizes that effectively by saying that the administration believes that Russia has committed war crimes. And they point to the fact that civilians have been targeted. The Secretary of State saying earlier today, quote, many of the sites Russia's forces have hit have been clearly identifiable as in use by civilians. So that is the rationale. What is the real world impact here? Well, Tom, war crimes investigations are quite thorough. They can take years, and there are investigations underway currently in the international community. But it's not clear that Vladimir Putin will be held responsible or will be punished. It is possible. Top officials were pressed on that today. They said, look, all options are on the table, but underscored the fact that this is quite a long process. So the impact right now, again, Tom, as you say, is this power play to really intensify the pressure on Vladimir Putin, who so far has been undeterred by all of the actions by the West. And it all happens on the eve of this critical NATO summit, Tom.
And Kristen, you know, the Biden administration has been playing this delicate dance where they want to help Ukraine. They want to give Ukraine weapons. They have been doing that, but they don't want to escalate tensions, or at least have the perception of that with the Russians. I know you have some new reporting tonight that there may be an announcement from President Biden on adding troops to NATO countries.
That's right. We are told that President Biden may announce increased U.S. troop levels indefinitely in NATO countries. This would not only be a goal at a show of force, but it could roil the Russians. So we'll have to see if he makes that announcement and what the impact of it might be. But we do know that the president and his NATO allies are going to be announcing more sanctions, more military aid, as well as more humanitarian aid. The stakes could not be higher, Tom, for the reasons that you laid out. The president is under pressure to really help Ukraine, to get something done, to try to get Putin to back down, because so far he has been undeterred in his invasion of Ukraine. Tom.
Kristen Welker for us from Brussels tonight. Kristen, thank you for that. For more on this high-stakes summit, I want to bring in former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor. He's currently the Vice President for Russia and Europe at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Ambassador, great to have you back here on Top Story. I want to circle back to something me and Kristen were talking about, along with Richard in his report there, which is that the U.S. has formally accused Russia of war crimes. Does this accusation carry any teeth? And I ask that because we know that Russia isn't party to the International Criminal Court.
No, you're right, Tom. And I think we're less concerned, at least I'm less concerned about teeth. I'm more concerned about letting the world know, letting President Putin know, and most importantly, letting the Russians know what's going on in Ukraine. And when the President of the United States or the State Department, the U.S. government says that Putin and his whole chain of command are committing war crimes in Ukraine, this will get through. Now, they will dismiss it, or they will argue against it, but it will get through to the Russian people, and it will get through to Mr. Putin. He wants to think of himself as a great Russian leader. And if he's going to go down in history, it's going to be as a war criminal. That's got to bother him.
NATO leaders are set to discuss concerns about chemical weapons use, right? But NATO's Secretary General today said the priority, of course, is to prevent a larger war between NATO allies and Russia. Does that mean that NATO won't intervene if we do find evidence of chemical weapons?
So I guess we have said that we will respond. And that response is yet to be determined. I imagine this will be a topic for the summit. The NATO leaders to figure out if they want to answer that question you just asked, Tom, how they want to respond. What kind of response? There are ways to deal with chemical weapons. And we know that President Putin has used them on his own people as well as on Syrians. So this is a serious question that the NATO leaders will address, and I am sure they will have an answer.
Do you think anything happens after this weekend with the NATO allies meeting? We know President Zelensky of Ukraine is going to address the summit as well. Is anything going to change in the calculation for Vladimir Putin? Can anything be accomplished without NATO committing troops to this war?
I think so. I think it can be. There are things that can be accomplished. NATO can turn up the spigot of the flow of weapons going into President Zelensky and his heroic army. They need help. They need weapons. They need ammunition. They need the anti-aircraft, the anti-tank. They need a lot of military equipment, and they need it now. And the NATO allies have some of that. They have a lot of that. They've got it in storage. They've got it in theater. So the decisions can be made on that. And second thing, in addition to opening the spigot even broader, just open the spigot totally, tighten the noose. Tighten the noose on sanctions. The sanctions are not fully in place. There are sanctions that need to be put in place. There are banks, Tom, that are in Russia who are still connected into the SWIFT system. That can change. There are people in the chain of command who are not yet sanctioned. There are people in the Duma who are not yet sanctioned. So there are ways to both open the spigot and tighten the noose.
Ambassador Taylor for us tonight. Ambassador, we always appreciate you on Top Story. Thank you. And as we discuss the war in Ukraine, we want to take a moment and recognize a diplomatic trailblazer. Former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has died. She was the first woman to serve in that post. She oversaw some of the most challenging diplomatic moments in recent history. Andrea Mitchell has a look now at her remarkable life.
Madeleine Corbell Albright.
By the time Madeleine Albright became Secretary of State, she had already raised a family and had a full career. But this second act, becoming the country's first female Secretary of State in 1997, was historic.
This is a dream come true. Actually, a dream I never thought I could have, and I feel great.
Working to shape seminal moments in world history, Albright's immigrant status informed her approach. Born Marie Corbell, the daughter of a Czech diplomat, arrived in the U.S. at age 11 after her parents sought asylum from communism in 1948. She graduated from Wellesley, got a Ph.D. from Columbia, worked for the National Security Council, and advised Democratic presidential candidate Michael Dukakis in 1988. Albright was a professor of international affairs at Georgetown and president of a Washington think tank before being named Bill Clinton's UN ambassador in 1993. As UN ambassador, Albright had argued in favor of early military intervention in Bosnia, butting heads with then Joint Chiefs Chairman Colin Powell over his reluctance to commit U.S. forces to the conflict. In 1997, Albright learned, after spending her life as a Christian, that her grandparents were in fact Jewish and had been victims of the Holocaust. She visited Israel later that year to push the peace process, stopping at Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Museum.
I know I will never forget my visit.
As Secretary of State, Albright was most proud of her work in Kosovo.
Now it's an independent country, and there's a whole generation of little girls whose first name is Madeleine.
She blazed a trail for future chief diplomats.
I have not found that being a woman is a handicap. In fact, I've found it a terrific gender to be.
Albright's passion for pins became part of her diplomatic arsenal. A serpent, a dove, an upside-down bird to honor downed civilian pilots. After leaving the State Department, Albright continued promoting democracy and democratic politics. She supported Hillary Clinton's quest for the White House, famously employing her personal motto as a rallying cry.
There's a special place in hell for women who don't help each other.
Albright became a vocal critic of President Donald Trump.
I do not call Donald Trump a fascist. I do think, however, he's the least democratic president in modern American history.
Awarded a Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012, Albright considered herself first and foremost a grateful American.
Andrea Mitchell joins us now. Andrea, I want to ask you about Albright's achievement as being the first female Secretary of State, because you were covering her. You know, you wrote a lot in your own book about sort of the hurdles you had to overcome as a female journalist trying to cover politics and foreign affairs out of Washington, D.C. When she was finally named Secretary of State, what was that moment like?
Well, it was really wonderful. She was such a mentor to women, and she had told me privately that one of the things she wanted to do at the State Department was do something about gender discrimination, about the way women diplomats have been treated for generations, really. And so after she was sworn in that night, there was a reception. She invited the press corps, family, friends, and one of her top aides that she had inherited at the State Department, a man, took issue with my having said that, you know, quoting a senior official, that one of her goals was to do something about gender discrimination at the State Department. And he said, that was totally wrong. Where did you get that from? I don't know who your source was. And all I could think to myself very privately was, you'll find out, which he did. Because she did break the barriers at the State Department, not just at the very top, but all the way down.
What an incredible story. And Andrea, you know, I'm curious, you mentioned there in your report, you point out how she was the daughter of a Czech diplomat. They fled communism. If she was Secretary of State right now, do you think she would be doing anything differently? Do you think she would be advising the president in a different manner?
Well, she, in fact, a day before the invasion, she wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, a column, talking about how when she first met Vladimir Putin in 2000, she was the top official, the first U.S. top official to meet him, and he had just become acting president. And she wrote in her notes afterwards that her meeting with him was so different from Boris Yeltsin, of course, and that he was cold-eyed and almost reptilian, and that he told her at the time how he didn't understand the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of the Berlin Wall, perhaps, but not that the entire Soviet Union went down, and that he wanted to restore it, and that he always had this vision. So she sized him up from the very beginning, and she certainly admired the tough stand that this administration has taken and reuniting the allies and strengthening NATO, she would be horrified by talk of chemical weapons and by the grinding down of what's happening in the cities across Ukraine, but so admiring of the resistance. But she foretold all of this in that column.
Andrea Mitchell for us tonight, part of our team there in Brussels. Andrea, thank you for that. We want to head now, though, to Washington and the heated hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. President Biden's Supreme Court nominee grilled by Republican lawmakers and again pressed about race and crime. NBC's Peter Alexander has the latest.
For a second straight day, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson facing heated questions from Republicans charging she's soft on crime.
Why did you sentence him for half the amount?
You're not recognized, Senator.
Pointing to cases where Jackson handed down sentences for child pornography offenders that were shorter than prosecutors recommended.
One of the most effective deterrents is one that I imposed in every case and that judges across the country impose in every case, which is substantial supervision. Any of these
wait a minute, Judge. You think it is a bigger deterrent to take somebody who's on a computer looking at sexual images of children in the most disgusting way is to supervise their computer habits versus putting them in jail?
No, Senator, I didn't say versus.
That's exactly what you said.
Jackson's sentences were in line with 70% of federal judges. Late last night, Republicans pressed Jackson on cultural issues, too, including transgender rights.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the law and I decide.
Late today, Jackson becoming emotional as Cory Booker praised her historic nomination.
You have earned this spot. You are worthy. You are a great American.
All right, Peter joins us now from the White House. And Peter, another headline out of this explosive hearing was Jackson's answer to a question in regards to the case about Harvard University's affirmative action policy.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. She made news with that answer. She said, if confirmed, that she plans to recuse herself from that case that alleges that Harvard University's admissions process discriminates against Asian American applicants. Jackson serves on a policy board at Harvard. The Biden administration has urged the court to reject the challenge to Harvard's affirmative action policy. Tom.
Peter Alexander. Peter, thank you for that. Still ahead tonight, the new details in that shocking New York City shoving death. We told you about this last night. The 26-year-old turning herself into authorities after allegedly knocking down a beloved Broadway voice coach. The chilling new revelation about what the suspect did after the attack. Plus, an update tonight on that tragic crash in Oklahoma, what we're learning about the 6 teenage victims, and the dramatic shootout on a quiet neighborhood street. This video is wild. Two cars colliding head-on, bullets ringing out from both vehicles. Top story, just getting started on this Wednesday night. Back now with the latest on that deadly shove in New York City. Prosecutors calling the suspect a flight risk, with the judge setting her bail at $500,000. Rahima Ellis again tonight with more of the chilling details just emerging from this case.
Hey, what did you do it?
Tonight, more details in the investigation that led the suspect in the street shove attack of an 87-year-old to turn herself in earlier this week. The Manhattan DA's office releasing a timeline of how they identified Lauren Pazienza, who is facing manslaughter and assault charges in the death of Barbara Gustern. But Pazienza's attorney continues to defend her character.
She's a law-abiding citizen who has got a college education, has got a job, she's engaged, she's got a beautiful family, she's never been in trouble in her life.
Prosecutors say an eyewitness to the assault who gave Gustern first aid helped identify the suspect seen in surveillance video. Notably, the DA claims to also have video of the suspect spending over 20 minutes in the area after the alleged attack, having a physical altercation with her fiancé near the scene, and even watching the ambulance arrive for Gustern. Prosecutors say surveillance video taken at Pazienza's apartment building that very night shows her wearing the same outfit as the suspect in the surveillance video moments after the attack. Her attorney remains doubtful.
There's a video of someone who looks like my client who's across the street or in the subway, but there's no video that shows what took place.
In the days following the attack, prosecutors say Pazienza deleted her entire social media presence, even taking down her wedding website, despite the ceremony coming up in June, then fleeing to her parents' house on Long Island and stashing her cell phone at her aunt's house. When detectives finally went to look for her at her parents' house, her father claimed she wasn't home, according to the DA. The following day, she turned herself in with her attorney. Still, the DA's office sees her as a flight risk.
Why didn't she turn herself in earlier?
She turned herself in as soon as she was asked to.
Gustern's neighbors are still in shock.
I feel very vulnerable. Look, I'm older, and I have a cane.
New York City has seen similar cases of violence against the elderly, with the NYPD tweeting out at least 9 times looking for suspects since the year began. The victims' ages range from 67 to 91 years old. Dealing with the loss of their loved one, Barbara Gustern's family waits for answers.
I'd like to stress innocent until proven guilty. You know, if she did do this, then I would like answers, but this woman deserves her day in court.
Okay, very sensible answer there. Rahima Ellis joins us now from 30 Rock Live tonight. So Rahima, you know, we got some good information there in your story, but I'm curious because we heard the lawyers say they don't have any video of the actual crime being committed. So how did police jump from having a suspect to identifying her?
There is a line that takes them to that. It starts with the attack happened on March 10th, and police then released this surveillance video. Following 9 days later, an anonymous tip came into police identifying the woman as Lauren Pazienza, and that then led police to her parents' home. When they got there, the parents refused to allow them to go inside of the house. The next thing they know, the police get a call from her attorney saying she wants to surrender herself to police. So now that's how we are at this point. Authorities or her attorney is now saying that it looks like they're going to be able to put up that $500,000 cash bail in order for her to get out of jail, and she's due back in court before the end of the week. So the court case and her getting out of jail could all happen before the end of the week. Tom?
All right, Rahima Ellis with a lot of new reporting tonight for us. Rahima, we thank you for that. And another violent attack that was caught on camera, this time on what's normally a quiet street in Wisconsin. A shootout turned car crash. This video is absolutely wild, all of it as a young mother and her daughter watch nearby. Zincle Esemwa has that story.
Tonight, a dramatic shootout between 2 cars ends in a head-on collision. Now, police are investigating. Residents of a usually quiet Milwaukee, Wisconsin street were shocked to hear gunfire ring out Sunday night.
It sounded like a bomb exploded close to my house.
2 vehicles seen in this video sped towards each other, occupants exchanging gunfire, according to police, before colliding, spinning on the road. Video from an area resident then shows some suspects fleeing the scene.
We talk about gun violence on the East Coast and the West Coast, but what about the Midwest? What are you seeing there?
Almost every city has experienced a significant increase in shootings and homicides since the latter part of 2020 or 2021. The Milwaukee year-to-date change in homicide is 96% right now. That means that their shooting increase is, it's through the roof.
Just this weekend, the U.S. saw 9 mass shootings, which left 8 people dead and more than 60 injured. In this case, police say an 18-year-old was treated at a hospital for injuries, and 7 people were involved, 2 minors, one just 15 years old.
What is the human cost of the gun violence we see in the U.S.?
I think the human cost is immeasurable to some extent. Certainly the families that have been impacted by gun violence, the victims and their families. But then I think, we've also seen, significant increases in arrests.
At the scene, police say they found 2 guns, and neighbors say they're still in shock.
Shaken up to no end. I'm still shaking from last night. I couldn't sleep last night.
Another woman who asked to remain anonymous due to safety concerns tells NBC affiliate TMJ4 she was driving home from a grocery run with her daughter when it all began.
Then all of a sudden I just see a boy just lean over out the car and just start doing shots. I think we were just in shock, like we just slammed the brakes, and then we were just like the immediate response was to get out of there and get to safety because my daughter was in the car.
We assumed that with the pandemic slowing down and things getting back to normal, that our shooting and homicide problem would at least start to level off or preferably go down. But unfortunately, we continue to see these numbers increasing.
All right, Zinclay Esamwa joins us now live. Zinclay, is there any type of manhunt? Have they been able to track down these suspects at all? What do we know?
Yeah, Tom. So the Milwaukee DA tells us that the suspects are not in their custody, but that they will review any charges that play out. And while the numbers around gun violence in Milwaukee are pretty wild, you'll remember I said a 96% increase in homicides in that city. The expert I spoke with, Professor Herman, points out that cities overall actually need to do a better job reporting their crime and gun violence data. On Monday, the FBI did not release crime data trends by region of the country. And the professor says that's a big, somewhat unprecedented deal. And as gun-related crimes increase, Tom, around the country, he says it's important that cities accurately and thoroughly track what's happening. Tom?
Yeah, track it and then hopefully stop it, which is even more important. All right, Zinclay, thank you for that. When we come back, the Beverly Hills heist. Thieves using a sledgehammer to steal millions of dollars of jewelry. What one suspect left behind, you won't believe this. That could help police track them down. Stay with us. All right, we are back now with Top Stories newsfeed, and we begin with the latest on that deadly crash that killed 6 teenagers in Oklahoma. Police say the victims range in age from 15 to 17 years old, and they were on their lunch break when they collided with a semi-truck. The 16-year-old driver and one passenger were wearing seatbelts at the time. The 51-year-old truck driver was not injured. The NTSB is now investigating this crash. And the search tonight for smash-and-grab robbers who stole millions of dollars in jewelry. New video showing at least 5 thieves using sledgehammers in the middle of the day to break the front window of a store in Beverly Hills. Police say they took an estimated $5 million worth of jewelry before fleeing in a stolen car. But here's the thing. Authorities are now trying to track the group down after one suspect left his cell phone behind. We'll stay on top of this one. Now to the investigation into baby formula linked to at least 2 infant deaths. This is incredibly sad. The FDA says an inspection revealed baby formula maker Abbott failed to maintain sanitary conditions at its Michigan manufacturing plant earlier this year. A rare bacteria was found in some of the Similac formula produced at that plant, prompting a recall. The FDA says inspectors also found at least 8 instances of contamination since 2019. All right, and the wreckage of a whaling ship has been found after more than 2 centuries. New video shows the discovery on the ocean floor just off the coast of New Orleans. The ship, called Industry, was hunting whales when a strong storm caused it to sink in May of 1836. Local historians say its crew of enslaved Africans and Native Americans were able to return safely to shore. That's pretty incredible. Now to the fight against COVID-19. Moderna announcing today early results of its COVID-19 vaccine trial for young children. The company saying it now plans to ask the FDA to authorize the shots for children as young as 6 months old. I want to bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar. And Dr. Azar, I want to start with, what do we know about the efficacy of Moderna's vaccine for young children so far?
Right, Tom. Well, the company basically gave us a readout of 2 different points. One was that the immune response that was mounted by the kids in this age group was comparable to that seen in the adult group, 18 and older. And that kind of information is what we refer to as immunobridging. So we're taking this immunological data and extrapolating and saying, well, if it worked for adults, it's going to work for kids. And then in terms of efficacy, we saw these numbers, and this is what's kind of making the news right now, Tom, is that the efficacy in terms of preventing infection was around 40%, give or take a few percentage points in both age groups, 6 months to 2 years, and 2 years to just under 6 years. Now, you may recall that this is below the 50% threshold that the FDA had set as a minimum bar of efficacy before any vaccine would be approved by them. So it'll be very interesting to see what they have to say about this number and whether or not they think it's good enough to actually go ahead and give Moderna this authorization.
Yeah, and so I kind of want to stick to that point right there, which you just mentioned, Dr. Azar. So as you mentioned, just so the viewers understand, Moderna's vaccine proved about, I think it's 40 to 44% effective in preventing illness in children 6 months old to 6 years old. And again, as you said, this isn't even the 50% efficacy that the FDA wanted to see from the vaccine for adults. So what should parents do in this situation?
You know, it's tough. I was sort of, when I looked at the data, I thought to myself, well, you know, in a good year, this is roughly as effective as the flu shot. And most of us who are thinking about giving our children the COVID vaccine probably give their kids the flu vaccine. You could look at it, the cup half full, and say that 40% is better than nothing. It did protect the kids against severe disease, but I have to make a note that the children, both the vaccine and the placebo group, no child was hospitalized with severe disease. So you can't really say that it prevented severe disease because no one in the group ended up in the hospital. You know, the drug company basically said this is comparable to the numbers that we saw against Omicron. And we know that there was a significant, diminution of efficacy from that initial readout. Tom, you might remember the 90% and 95% efficacious from the original variant, and from Delta, we saw a significant decline against Omicron. So again, this is a two-shot a series. Moderna fully anticipates, I think, that they will need perhaps a 3-shot, just like we do in adults, and they are testing that. They're also testing an Omicron-specific vaccine to see whether or not that enhances, the response. But I think we're going to have an interesting debate when the FDA meets to discuss this, and I think they're probably going to take a look at Pfizer's 3-shot data in that age group 5 to 11 around the same time, and probably make very similar recommendations. Tom.
Dr. Azar, you always explain this in such a way that we can easily understand. I know a lot of parents are going to be confused by some of these numbers. Dr. Azar, again, thank you for your time here on Top Story. We now head to Global Watch and the gas leak at a London Aquatic Center. Officials say a chemical reaction released chlorine gas into the air. Nearly 30 people were hospitalized and roughly 200 people evacuated from the facility. Officials now working to clear the air. The venue was originally used in the 2012 Olympic Games, you may remember. It is now open to the public. All right, we also want to give you updated on that latest in the deadly plane crash in China we've been following this week. Chinese officials saying they have located one of the 2 black boxes believed to be a cockpit voice recorder from the wreckage. Officials are still trying to determine what caused that plane to nosedive into the side of a mountain in southern China. All 132 people aboard are presumed dead. The U.S. will also send a team of investigators. And this is a big headline from the sports world. The world's top-ranked tennis player is retiring at just 25 years old. In an emotional video posted online, Ash Barty saying she was, quote, spent, and that it was time to chase other dreams. The announcement coming just 2 months after she won the Australian Open for her 3rd Grand Slam singles title. Barty has previously walked away from the sport due to burnout back in 2014. Okay. We turn now to the Americas, where we focus on stories from the U.S. and Latin America. Anti-war Russians are arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border, along with Ukrainians fleeing the war, but the border remains officially closed to asylum seekers under a COVID-related policy. And unlike the Ukrainians, Russians have been less likely to receive an exemption that would allow them to request asylum inside the U.S. Guad Venegas explains.
A Russian camp with families, including children, set right at the U.S. border. They oppose the invasion of Ukraine and have fled across the world with no visas to enter the U.S. Camping out for days in front of the port of entry, Anton and his wife Julia say going back home is not an option.
Yes, I do feel unsafe in Russia because there's been some police tracking after me. I know that my political activism is known, has been noticed by the government.
The Mexican government is now bracing for more Russians on the way, but their arrivals began before the war, with 75,000 flying in last year and another 28,000 since the beginning of this year. Many of them now attempting to seek asylum in the U.S. This group rushing the San Diego port of entry in September of last year. Others renting or buying cars to make it just a few feet inside American territory, where the car is then left behind. Illegal actions triggered by necessity. With the border still officially closed to asylum seekers, the current policy known as Title 42 that was put in place during the pandemic has been shutting the door to people from all countries, with strong pushback from human rights groups.
What should the U.S. government do?
We're asking that Title 42 end today.
and that the United States resume the asylum process for vulnerable people from all over the world that come to our U.S. southern border.
The Department of Homeland Security has issued guidance to border agents, reminding them exemptions can be given for humanitarian reasons. An internal memo of that guidance, reported by CBS News, shows Ukrainians mentioned, but not the Russians. At the border, most Ukrainians being allowed to enter, while Anton and Julia watch along with other Russians.
We already here about a week, so, well, I would like to, well, just wash my hair and so on. So we decided to go. My husband is a bit sick, so you hear his voice.
Julia and her group had to pick up the camp and move away from the port of entry, but they'll remain at the border with other Russians stuck in limbo.
All right, Guad joins us now. Guad, I know you mentioned this in your story that this all started about a year ago when Russians started coming in bigger numbers to the U.S. What are you hearing now from your sources on the ground, and what are Russians trying to seek asylum to the U.S. saying about this war?
So Russians started coming to Mexico in large numbers, many of them fleeing the government in Russia because they felt persecuted there, right? But now with the war, there's less flights that go from that part of the world to Mexico. So there's been less Russians coming in. But the ones that are still coming into Mexico say they have fled because of the war. So now for the ones that have made it to the U.S.-Mexico border, who are currently there waiting with Ukrainians, they are waiting for some type of policy change that could favor them. But we've only seen that to help the Ukrainians at the U.S.-Mexico border. We saw TPS, which is the temporary protection status, given to Ukrainians who were already in the U.S. when the war started. We also saw the guidance, right? The guidance that was issued to border officials indicating they can give humanitarian exemptions to the Ukrainians at the U.S.-Mexico border because of the war. And now the Biden administration is preparing to unveil a plan to bring in vulnerable refugees from Ukraine directly into the U.S. Yet for the Russians that are in Mexico who say they are persecuted in their country, they're sort of stuck in limbo as they wait.
Guad Venegas for us tonight with an interesting look and a different take there on the immigration crisis created by this war there in Ukraine. Guad, thank you. Coming up, concerning numbers for anyone looking to buy a home. Skyrocketing mortgage rates squeezing some first-time buyers out of the housing market. What future homeowners need to know. Stay with us. Back now with Money Talks, what consumers and investors need to know from the business world and beyond. Some concerning news for anyone in the housing market. With a historic lack of available homes fueling high prices, mortgage interest rates are spiking as well. It's causing second thoughts for both home buyers applying for their first mortgage and homeowners looking to refinance. CNBC's Diana Olick joins us now to break all this down for us. She covers this for the network. So, Diana, mortgage rates have been rising for a while now, but they really shifted into high gear. I mean, this is pretty dramatic. Just how high are these rates now, and how are they impacting buyers?
Well, Tom, no question, buyers are really taking a hit. Take a look at the average on the 30-year fixed. It's around 4.7% today, according to Mortgage News Daily. And it wasn't even expected to go past 4.5% by the end of the year, but it got hit by the crisis in Ukraine, rising oil prices and inflation. All of it lit a fire under rates. Last year at this time, it was around 3.5%. So for home buyers now, if you add in soaring home prices, then on the average home, you're looking at about $350 more on the monthly payment than a year ago, and close to $100,000 more over the life of that loan. And remember, it's not just the monthly payment, but as rates go up, more borrowers just don't qualify for a mortgage, Tom.
And this happens at a time when American consumers are already being squeezed with inflation. And the higher rates, I want you to explain this to our viewers, because some people may be sitting at home saying, well, I already own a home, or I'm not too worried about this. Even if they have a fixed rate loan, they should be paying attention, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because fewer and fewer borrowers can now refinance to a lower rate. Refi applications dropped 14% last week compared to the previous week. And rates were so low at the beginning of the pandemic that millions of people refied and got great savings. But for those who didn't, well, I'm sorry to say they kind of missed the boat. Also, these crazy high home price gains, they've given homeowners a lot of equity, collectively trillions of dollars worth of equity. And they might want to pull that out in a refi, but now that's more expensive to do as well, Tom.
So, Diana, if you take your crystal ball out for us, in markets that have seen prices explode, I'm talking about cities in Texas and Florida, the Carolinas, where many buyers have just been priced out, or people just don't want to sell their homes because they have nowhere to go. These rising interest rates, what do you think happens now to those markets?
Well, it's going to depend entirely on the local economies and on the home builders. Look, we need more supply in these markets. That's what's going to help in any case. But the home builders are still raising prices, and so they have higher costs for land, labor, materials. And so if they increase prices more, then people just really can't afford it. But remember, Texas and Florida are some of the biggest home building markets in the country. So if the builders do put more stock in there, then people will be able to buy more and potentially at lower prices, because when we see sales start to slow, then about 6 months later, prices start to cool off a little bit too.
I can tell you from friends and family in both Houston and South Florida, they are not building fast enough, but we hear you, Diana. Diana, always a pleasure to have you here on Top Story. Thank you so much. When we come back, Madeleine Albright's life and legacy, in her own words, what the trailblazing diplomat said about her journey from refugee to the first female U.S. Secretary of State. Stay with us. Finally tonight, she was a refugee, an ambassador, and our first female Secretary of State. Here's Madeleine Albright in her own words.
Nothing makes me prouder than to have represented the United States abroad and to sit behind the sign that said United States and to be an American. I was not born in the United States. I was a child in Europe where I lived in fear because my native Czechoslovakia had been taken over by communists. But within a few months, my family found refuge in America. I think my value system is what my parents taught me, and it did make me realize that one had to care about people in faraway places with unpronounceable names. My life reflects both the turbulence of Europe in the middle of this century and the tolerance and generosity of America throughout its existence.
Arriving on our shores as a refugee from tyranny and oppression, she worked her way up with determination and character to attain our nation's highest diplomatic office. She knows from her life's experience that freedom has its price and democracy its rewards. Her story is the best of America's story, told with courage, compassion, and conviction.
How significant is it that a woman is now Secretary of State for the United States of America?
Well, I think it's very important that that glass ceiling has been smashed, but I think that what is important here is that I am dedicating myself to pursuing national interests for the American citizen, and that a lot of the issues that people don't think are usually foreign policy issues, I'm going to make sure that people understand that they are. What I'm really proudest of is what we did in Kosovo. I really found it very difficult to watch when people were being killed for what they were, what religion they were. And to be in a position to have something to do with the United States making a difference there is what I think was very, very important. And the people of Kosovo, now it's an independent country, and there's a whole generation of little girls whose first name is Madeleine.
Madeleine Albright was 84 years old. Thanks so much for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.